So hello, dear ones, and greetings from the Center for Contemporary Mysticism in Philadelphia. My name is Joe Irwin, and it's a joy to gather with you again to explore this amazing journey that we share. We have a great program for you today, but first, I always like to pause and take a minute to welcome everyone, and especially people who are new to the center. If you don't know about the center, it's been around, we're just entering our 10th year, and have a whole variety of speakers and programs and all sorts of good things to support you in your journey. And you can find more about it at our website, which is simply contemporarymysticism.org. There you'll find hundreds of resources, of videos of past programs and speakers, groups in which you can participate, and all sorts of things to support you. I like to tell people to remember our goal is to be a partner with you in your journey. So if you feel what we're doing is important, we invite you to get involved, join, support, however you feel called of the center, and help us continue this work that we're in together. So now it's a real pleasure to welcome back our guest for the day. I say back because Penny Gill was with us just a little over 2 years ago. We began with a conversation on wisdom teachings for our time, and today we want to continue that, focusing a little more on compassion teachings that's reflected in her new book called The Radiant Heart of the Cosmos. She deals with questions like, how can we begin the work of healing the suffering in our own lives as well as in our community and in the whole world? So as you know, Penny is an author, a political scientist, was former dean of Mount Holyoke College in Massachusetts for over 3 decades, and is a mystic, I feel, in her own right. Is now retired and living on Madeline Island, Wisconsin, out in the middle of Lake Superior. So welcome back, Penny. It's truly an honor to have you.
Well, it's a delight to be with both of you, and I love your work. So I hope people will, in fact, get in and come to these monthly talks at the very least. Yeah.
Well, thank you. We appreciate that, and we hope that we always make new friends each month. I want to introduce to you Patricia Pierce. For those who are new, who may not know, she's our primary interviewer, and also herself an author and former pastor, spiritual teacher, and host of a great podcast called the We Awakening Podcast. She also leads companion groups for those participating in the global transition that's an awakening that's taking place in our world. So we are glad that you're getting to know Patricia. So we've been looking forward to having Penny back and also engaging with each of you who are with us today. As you probably know, our programs include a Q&A session after Patricia and our guest talk for a while. We then open it up for questions and give you the opportunity to click on raise your hand, and you'll be able to come on screen if you wish and be able to talk one-on-one with Penny and or Patricia. And even if you're shy about showing your smile to the world, you can enter a question in the Q&A box, and we try to get to as many of those as possible. So at this point, I think, Patricia and Penny, we'll turn it over to you, and I'll be back a little bit later down the line for a Q&A session.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Joe. Well, Penny, I have been looking forward to this. Always.
So have I. Oh, my goodness.
So I'm going to ask a very big question, but perhaps you can do our Reader's Digest version. And that is, you have this new book, The Radiant Heart of the Cosmos, Wisdom Teachings for Our Time, or Compassion Teachings for Our Time. And this is I guess, in a sense, a sequel book to your first one, which is titled, What in the World is Going On? Wisdom Teachings for Our Time. And these are both, well, the first book was channeled from Manjushri, a Tibetan deity. And this book includes Manjushri's voice, your voice, and Kuan Yin's voice. So I want to sort of zoom us out for just a moment and have you speak a little bit about the background, how this book came to be and how this relationship that you have, these relationships with these two teachers, came to be in your life.
Well, it is a wonderful story, and it can be found in each of the books because it certainly has to be told. But I was essentially invaded by each of those teachers' voices. Kuan Yin about 22, 23 years ago, and Manjushri about 15 years ago. And each arrived offering to share some teachings with me. And I had no experience doing anything like this, and I have to say I totally freaked out. The energy was awesome, in both meanings of that word. And the content was just wonderful. And I'd been teaching globalization and international politics and things like that. And my students asked me constantly in fact, I taught a seminar called What in the World is Going On, where we really tried to understand globalization. So Manjushri shows up and says, well, I have some things to tell you that will reframe the way you think about this. So that's the first book. And the two big themes there, and we can go back to those if you wish, is really the extraordinary moment we are in. He names it a shower of spirit, but he's really talking about a huge influx of energy that is helping us awaken, as all of your wonderful work is helping people to focus and discuss and integrate how we can expand our consciousness, how that happens. And he says, really, the major issue that's going on in your world right now is that your world is built on fear. And so focusing on how that has come to be, and then how we can begin to unravel it by healing our fears, becomes the second part of that first book.
Yeah.
Then Radiant Heart picks up that issue along with some other things, the book we're going to talk about today. And it tries to offer some understanding, some context, I want to say skills and tools to actually help people address our fears, starting with our personal stuff. That's hard enough work, but it's scary, and it's absolutely possible to do. And then each time you dislodge another old, unconscious fear, you get this big prize of a big hunk of new energy, and then you're really fired up and ready to go again. And so that book is about supporting the process of healing, and it brings along a lot of joy. There's a reason the Dalai Lama is always grinning, because he's done this work. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, the book, What in the World is Going On, is one that I've been recommending to people for years and years, because it gives such an amazing, far-reaching and in-depth reframing and context for what we're going through right now on this planet. And I think it's really, really helpful for us to be able to place ourselves in that way, because it is such a time of tumult, and to understand sort of these broader things that are happening, I think is really helpful. Now, when we get now to your second book, The Radiant Heart of the Cosmos, there's so much here. We could spend like a whole day talking about it, but we don't have that. But before we launch in, I want to just note that you have your PhD in political science from Yale, and you taught political science for over 40 years. And I was just curious to hear you actually reflect on this momentarily. How do you see this as an extension? I mean, what that says to me, that you have been so interested in political science, is that you are interested in like how things function and the relationships, and how can the world function better. So how is this work an outgrowth of that, or an expansion of that? What do you see as the tie?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. Mostly, I have experienced this retirement work as a criticism and a critique of the academic world and the academic culture because of its unexamined assumptions about materialism. That if you can't see it, count it, touch it, or measure it, it's not real. It's not important. It's not significant. And that's a gigantic, gigantic issue in our culture that is a big contributor to the mess we're in right now. So on the one hand, absolutely, there is no connection. But on the other hand, Manjushri has said to me 3 or 4 times, well, one of the reasons we wanted to download this information to you is because you are so interested in how the world works, that it makes you a particularly, he wouldn't say pissy, but I would, a pissy listener. and especially because I'm so interested in the global systems and how they interact and what the consequences of those interactions are. That's, fundamentally what's behind climate change. It's fundamentally what's behind the massive increase in civil violence and inequality in the world, et cetera, et cetera. We can talk about modernity for hours, but we needn't.
Yes. Yeah. So it's like,
it created a particular kind of receptor, and Manjushri has said, we love you have so many words for all this stuff.
Yes. They could use that Yale trained brain and
exactly
linguistic properties. So when you talk about your critique of the academy, it's not only materialistic, but it's also heavily, heavily masculine oriented, the masculine mind, the masculine principle, and that the mind that evaluates and dissects and steps back to look and observe, and which is tremendously helpful.
Absolutely.
And our focus on that has come at the expense of honoring and really experiencing our own feminine, we'll use those words, right? Because it's sort of the language that we use. The feminine, some people refer to as the divine feminine, the dark feminine. So talk to us about that. I'm interested, the book begins with, Manjushri begins with an exploration into gender and how gendered our thinking is. And this is certainly part of that way of thinking. But talk to us about what the feminine means to you.
Well, I think I'm trying to understand that because I have been drenched in that world of analytic masculine thinking, as have so many of us. And so it's not that the feminine is goofy or woo-woo or things like that. It's that it's much more about intuition and the opening of the heart. It's much more about trusting the brain that lives in our torso, not the brain that lives in our skull. Almost all the indigenous cultures know there's a brain in your gut. And even the gastroenterologists are figuring that out right now, which is really fun to watch. But so the feminine is the ability to act and to perceive and to intuit and to actually grasp through the heart, not against the mind, but to allow that first flow of information in a non-categorized, non-dichotomized way of thinking. The mind comes in, the analytic thinking comes in a little later, and the prize is to get the two together, functioning cooperatively with each other. And that's not hard to do. It really isn't. As soon as you get the reframing and you recognize that thinking from your heart or perceiving from your heart is really easy. It's in our bodies. It's not hard. It's just we just need to stop things rather than learn new skills. It's there. It's our birthright.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about relating. It's about seeing deeply, and it's about seeing whole things. You know, the classic word is gestalt, to see the whole context of something rather than chopping things into smaller and smaller pieces so we can actually run it in a laboratory. And one of the things I so appreciated when I was receiving the teachings for the second book is it's never trashing masculine and analytic thinking. Never.
Right.
It's that it's not in the right relationship
Mm-hmm.
with feminine thinking. For some reason, it gets anxious about itself. And it has to deny that there's anything of value in feminine ways of moving in the world. It's not a new idea. It's a very old idea. Jung played with it a lot, and long before that. And the cultures that are becoming more and more of interest to people, what I just call the indigenous cultures, they're all over the world, obviously. They're much more earth-based. And so they think about relatedness rather than categorized things.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what lies behind our destruction of nature, including ourselves, because we belong in that ecosystem.
Right. Right. So as you were receiving these teachings, well, the whole book is the radiant heart of the cosmos. So the heart center, I'd like us to sort of delve into
Mm-hmm.
the heart center, because that's not something that in our Western world is maybe even on people's map of awareness. And I don't recall which voice in the book says, it might have been Manjushri, I don't recall, says the heart center is the royal road of awakening. And when we think about awakening, I think we tend to think of the mind, but this is really about the awakening happens from the heart center.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to us about what is the heart center?
Well, I wish I knew. I found it very hard to get this into language. And I think there might be 3 layers of it. And I tried to show this in the book by whether I was using capital letters or lowercase letters and things to try to get some distinctions. So first of all, there's the heart that keeps you alive. Bum, bum, bum. And then there's, and most of the Eastern traditions would say that we have more than just our physical body. This is why being a materialist really gets you mixed up. So that there's an emotional body and an intuitive body. And so heart center, your heart center, is the palpitating feeling center, understanding center of your energy body, of your heart, of your feeling life. That's that other brain, in a way. It's your other organ for knowing, which is really a better way to name it.
Mm-hmm.
And by healing that, by allowing it to take up its rightful place, a portal opens that gives you access to the great big capital letters heart center, which is really the portal for the cosmos. And this is why we get to cosmology so fast in this material. And I think that's always hard to do. It's a big stretch. But both teachers and I think most indigenous cultures believe that the universe wishes us to flourish, wishes Earth to flourish, wishes sentient beings to flourish. And that desire that what is flourish is the gift. That's what gets named, capital letters, Heart Center. That it's the desire for well-being in the cosmos as the basic quality and characteristic of physical and non-physical reality. I just love that idea. I just love that idea. And it solves a lot of problems with languaging. I'm allergic to the word God. I'm always making up new words for God because of what's happened to make what that word means in our society. And I just love thinking that the cosmos is this big pulsing heart that wishes, that sends out love, that sends out compassion. You know, it's the compassion story. So is it a metaphor? Well, sure. I don't think anybody's going to send an observatory outside of the solar system and find it. But I do think it's a quality of energy, a quality of a frequency of energy, perhaps a pattern of energy. Maybe it's what's at the heart of the black holes. It's fun to really just play with the idea. But the important thing is to recognize that you are a recipient of compassion from life itself. Life intends for you to be well. Life intends for you to do it, be it. And what starts this whole project, this book, what started this book was that I was wondering why the goddesses are always associated with taking care of suffering. What's with it? The goddesses always have to clean up suffering. Why don't the gods have to clean up suffering sometime? That's what got me going. That was the question. And so this is a very roundabout way. And eventually the original question left because I had framed it as, why is the feminine face always a dark face? And I think I have a pretty long, complicated answer to that, but it's really about the male gods taking over and kicking the fertility goddesses out of business during the agricultural revolution. I mean, a very long time ago in human history.
Yeah. And also, and see, I can't remember which voice was saying.
It doesn't matter.
They all weave together in such a beautiful way.
Yes.
But one of them, or you perhaps, were talking about the feminine also as being associated with formlessness. And and this is like such a great time of year, at least I think, to delve into the dark feminine, because we are in the northern hemisphere moving towards the winter solstice, and the darkness is increasing. And for me, the darkness is mystery. It's the unknowable. It's the womb in which the non-manifested can gestate into manifestation. So it's all of those things. And where am I going with that? I don't even know. But for me, the heart center, well, I want to transition, because Manjushri says, and here I have this, I have some quotes here I want us to look at. Manjushri said, the heart center within can only be opened through the path of suffering. And this comes back to what you're saying about why are the goddesses always like in charge of the suffering. And Manjushri is saying suffering is the way in which the heart center becomes opened. And before we like delve into that, I want to also just say that, and you brought this question up in the book, how are they using the word suffering? Because the Dalai Lama says, there's pain and then there's suffering, and suffering is like the imaginative thing that we add on from our human creativity. We add it on, we create our own suffering. But it sounds to me like they're using the word to refer to the immediate experience of pain, which is something that goes along with being in form, that all beings in form, that's part of that existence. So let's get into this. The heart center within can only be opened through the path of suffering.
Well, and he argues that, at least for human beings, that we aren't likely to stop and try to unearth what's causing our suffering until nothing else works. And he says, human beings are incredibly skillful at thinking of ways to avoid doing this process of self-healing. And he says, denial, deflection, violence, addiction, booze, sex, all of it are ways of damping down the heartache of being a being in form, of being temporary. And then at the root of it, it's the fear of not being alive, of losing our lives. And that's what he understands as helping us agree to when I say do the work, what I mean by that is self-healing, is choosing to address it directly and choosing to undo some of those terribly self-limiting strategies that are meant to reduce pain, but which really, really only intensify it. That's, in a sentence, really the core of Buddhist teachings. And the first noble truth is suffering's ubiquitous. And thank heaven, I'm so grateful to the Buddhists. I'm not an educated Buddhist. Thank heavens to the Buddhists for having taken that as their big project of figuring out what it means that suffering is ubiquitous, and that there are skillful ways to live with it. It's an incredible gift to us, because Western culture has noticed there's an awful lot of suffering, and so we should fix it. And that's not what the East does. And there's deep wisdom in having access to both, and two different strategies, and we need both.
Yeah.
So I love that argument about formlessness. That is from Kuan Yin, and it does rise out of my kind of bratty question about how come the girls get all the suffering. And what I don't think the argument is made as fully in this new book as I wish it were. I just don't know how to say any more than what's there. But she's really saying that just the way form and formlessness are intricate sides of a single process, so suffering and compassion are also intimately linked together, two faces of the same thing. And that our experience of formlessness, both in ourselves and in what we are likely to lose, releases compassion in our hearts. And that is the opening to the heart center. So there are different ways of entering this hugely complex nexus of processes for coming to be brave enough to see the truth of things, and then comforted by understanding it's the nature of reality. It's not anything we're going to escape. And then the courage that comes from saying, okay, how can I make this work well for me and for the people I love and the community and those things? And And then the enormous surprise, I think, the gift, is that all of this, each of these steps, blows open your understanding of the world, of the people you don't know, of the people you love, of the people you can't stand. It is awakening. It is what you do in your podcast, and what you use your dreams to crack open different dimensions of it. It shapes your understanding of meditation. I mean, it's all over your work. You do this 24 hours a day, Patricia.
Well, I wanted to get, in terms of at some point, it may have been Manjula, I don't know if it was. I'll give up trying to remember.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't.
But there's a point in the book where it talks about all beings in form want to stay in form.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the root of the suffering, because no being in form is going to stay in form.
Precisely.
So that's like the dilemma, right?
Yeah,
That's the dilemma of being incarnate, is you want to stay incarnate and you're not going to. So it's like navigating that.
Yeah.
So coming back, as you started to talk about the complete interwovenness of suffering and compassion. And there's a point in the book where it says, in the instant that we turn away from suffering, we have shut down compassion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And as you look at the world, and I think as all of us look at the world, we can see that what we are suffering from, well, is fear. We'll get into that. And also a lack of compassion that we have created from our fear. We've created systems, economies, political systems that do not open the door for compassion. In fact, they're very uncompassionate many times. So maybe you can talk, I'd like to shift a little bit into personal experience. What would you like to say to us about your own journey of coming to face, embrace suffering, and how that indeed opened up your capacity for compassion?
Well, spoiler alert, I think that's the next book, in a sentence. I'm just starting to tune up. You have to have a winter project on this island.
Yes.
And it's a wonderful, deep, rich question. I have had quite a bit of experience of a long chronic illness, and then in my 30s I nearly died multiple times because of a really acute and weird GI issue. And I was able to never suffer with that. And it's a stunning example of how shut down my heart was. That the way to survive was to keep plowing ahead. And I was well taught it in my family. And I think it served many purposes, many survival purposes. It wasn't a bad thing. It's that it crowded out all the other things. And so in my elder years, I started to realize I had experienced quite a bit of trauma as a child that was reinscribed over and over again in my young and then later adulthood. And that the trauma was lodged in my body. And that I had to at least run an experiment to see if I could release any of it in my body. Because I've not been well. I'm not well now. Except I am. But, so the trauma stuff raised a whole bunch of questions. And and avenues for, I guess, exploration and invention. Trying to just recognize my body has needs and wishes and desires and instincts, and my entire toolbox was to say, shut up and cooperate. We're going to go do X regardless of how you're feeling. That's a big thing to turn around when you're 75. And so unpacking those stories you can see some of it in Radiant Heart. Having had the world's most intense arguments with my beloved editor, Jennifer Browdy, who wanted more stories. And I kept, I'm an academic. You protect your students from those stories. You keep a private and public wall. And she kept saying, I don't believe you didn't share this stuff with your students. I don't believe it, Penny. And I realized when I really thought about it is that I teach through stories, and most of us teach through stories. And I had to offer a few, and you can see some of them in part one, and a little leakage in part three. But it was under protest. The whole way it was under protest. And then I discovered I had a little discussion group going about the book this summer on the island. And at the end of it, we had wonderful conversations. At the end of it, I asked people which part of the book did they like the most. And no one had read it. We had had all these conversations, all these stories, immensely deep sharing, and no one had read the book.
But the stories themselves.
It was the stories
themselves. Yeah.
It was the stories. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was, I had to admit defeat. I had been totally persuaded. And the new book, I think, is going to be a memoir of my journey.
Because this book really, there's just some amazing, you really give the reader the opportunity to look into your inner life and how you do your inner life with the dream work, with these channeled messages, these conversations, really. They're conversations that you have with the teachers, the active imaginations that you do with, different parts of the self and so forth. It's really an amazing sort of map of, how you yourself have done this. And as an academic, I'm sure all this was happening under the surface.
Right, sure was.
Yeah. So the other part, so there's the suffering and compassion and how the two cannot be separated. And when we open up and acknowledge and accept suffering, whether that be someone else's or our own, we are opening up and expanding our capacity for compassion. And it talks about the importance of self-compassion, how it starts there. It really starts with self-compassion. And the other really central thing in the book has to do with fear. And that was very prevalent in the first book as well. And Manjushri has talked about politics is condensed fear, I think is the way.
Yeah, isn't that wild?
Politics is condensed fear.
Yeah.
And so we, the whole world that we've created has emerged out of our deep fears. So here's another quote. This is from Kuan Yin. The most revolutionary work available right now is to uncover, heal, and dissolve one's own fearfulness.
My favorite sentence.
Oh, yeah. So that to know that is revolutionary work. And by doing it, we are making a contribution to the global awakening. Because we tend to discount our own inner work when we look at the global situation, but that's where it all starts.
Yes. And that's the point of the book.
Yeah.
And exactly. You just summarized it beautifully. And I want to underline one thing you said and say it in capital letters. there is no way to be compassionate to someone else until you can be compassionate with yourself. That's a huge claim, and I'll take it to my deathbed. Because if you haven't been able to offer it to yourself, you are treating the other person as other.
Mm.
And denying the connectivity.
Mm-hmm.
And even, I think, identity, you might agree with me that identity is not really too strong a word. And so, you know, we're offered all these things that could fix us. But there's nothing healing in being fixed.
Right.
Nothing. In fact, it deepens the despair of disconnection.
Yeah.
And learning in this world, in this culture, with these gender roles, with these understandings of race and class, learning that we must begin by offering ourselves enormous compassion and kindness. And then really trying to uncover what the resistance to that is. And those are gendered, but they're equally powerful. And maybe they were an essential part of our socialization when we were little kids, you know. Everything I needed to learn, I learned in kindergarten. It's one of the big items in the kindergarten curriculum, is to be kind to other people. But very soon, the other part has to come.
Yeah.
Or all we've done is build aggressive egos.
Mm.
And we live in a world of aggressive egos. And aggressive because terrified.
Yeah. Yeah. Just sort of, this is sort of an aside, but that dualism, or that binary, that gendered binary, the dualism that has been part of, you know, the masculine principle, and certainly a foundational component of the patriarchy. Right now we're seeing gender fluidity, which, you know, is like existentially threatening to a system built on dualisms.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that when we know that, we can understand, like, deep fear, like this is so primal.
Yeah.
The whole construct of our world, this binary, and Manjushri talks about the first dualism that the masculine mind comes to is that of gender.
Yeah.
So it's so fascinating to be alive right now when that
Yes.
primal dichotomy is becoming blurred.
Mm-hmm.
It's just amazing. It's amazing.
And boundaries everywhere.
Yeah.
The internet ignores state boundaries and 10,000 others, but the fundamental one of our public lives is state boundaries. Gone.
Yeah. Right. Right. So that was sort of my little
yeah,
detour. And I'd like to bring us back to, because I think this is so important, our need to face and, you know, heal, dissolve fear.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that is our task, each of us. And it is our contribution to our own liberation and to the healing of the whole. So the book talks about a little bit of how to, but maybe I would love to hear you talk about that in your own life.
Mm-hmm.
What skills have you developed about how to face fear in a way that it can be healed and dissolved?
Well, if you're familiar, our listeners are familiar with any of the Sufi poets, Rumi and his pals, they're great teachers. Those poems are all about this. And when a fear knocks on your door, you will invite it in, have tea. Do not offer it the spare bedroom. Send it on its way. That's Rumi's poem, The Guest House, which is a terrible summary of Rumi's wonderful poem. But I think usually fear is the bottom layer. And if I'm really angry with something or feeling super sad or super disconnected or torn between two things and I can't find the third middle or any of those, mentally, psychologically, emotionally, really frustrating moments. If I can remember to say, Penny, sweetheart, is there some resistance here? And if I can get to some resistance, then I can ask myself, well, what is that resistance intended to protect you from? What's the little fear under that? Who is being echoed, or what situation this is reminding you of what situation? And 9 times out of 10, it's something that I developed as a child as a strategy to take care of myself a little bit in an environment that wasn't too focused on my being cared for. And then I say to myself, well, that was just brilliant. You were 6 and you figured out something that kept you going and okay and cheerful and loving school and whatever. Well done, Penny. Well done. But you're 79 now. Maybe you could do something a little more creative and imaginative than what you did when you were 6. And it's good to laugh about it because it's what we've all done. We got frozen with those strategies when we were little. It is brilliant that we could do them. But if we can't let go of them, we stay in these dissociative states, which doesn't allow us to access our feeling life. It's meant to stop that. It doesn't allow us to experiment, to feel free, to take risks. We get shrunk. We get shrunken into smaller and smaller versions of who we're supposed to be. And then we know we've been shrunken. Is that a word? I think so.
We'll call it one. I don't know. I think, yeah, it is.
We know that at some level we know we're way too little. Mm-hmm. And that makes us angry and it makes us aggressive because we think somebody else is doing that to us. Mm-hmm. And in a way that those 2 or 3 sentences explain contemporary American politics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So on the one hand, you get a lot of repression, depression, despair, suicidality, stuff like that. And on the other hand, you get this mindless aggression and violence. Mm-hmm. But they're both attempts to solve this issue of not being safe within ourselves. And that's the fear. So, the individual fear work is a slog until you get the hang of it. And then it's kind of like going to the dump once a week and getting rid of the week's garbage, It's kind of, I don't know, emotional hygiene. That's kind of routinized. At least it has in my life. I'm always at it, and the dreams often pinpoint something that really needs my compassionate attention.
Yeah.
But the wonderful payoff, the wonderful gift of doing this work yourself is not only that you feel incredibly better, I feel incredibly better. I'm much nicer to the people I share my life with because I can tell when I've gotten them all implicated in something that really was my stepfather.
Yeah, right.
Like, really?
Wrong person. Sorry.
Wrong generation,
Yeah.
So, and it's so good to laugh about it. It's when you can laugh about it, it's done. So it's great for the person who does the fear work. It's really nice for the people in the inner circle of that life. And as you say, it absolutely does contribute to the awakening of the whole planetary consciousness. But in between there, the teachers always say to me, only people who have done this work are free to envision a world that they would like to live in.
Yes.
And so it's about freeing the imagination, freeing creativity,
Right.
freeing our ability to be our big selves instead of our little tiny shrunken defensive selves.
Yeah. Yeah. As you're saying, until we allow ourselves to expand out of those pre-existing patterns of the 6-year-old, we can't really imagine bigger or different. Penny, I want to allow time for our listeners to have a chance to ask you questions, and I really want to thank you for being in this conversation.
Such a treat.
And I'm so pleased to know that you are writing a trilogy, that there's a third book coming, because the question that I wanted to close with was about your personal transformation, and stay tuned. We'll read about that in your next book. And I very much look forward to that, because I sense you have traveled far and wide and traversed a great, great distance in your own life.
And a huge gift.
Yeah.
And just a note, I just signed a contract to do a second edition of What in the World is Going On that will be published by Green Fire Press, and it shouldn't be too long. I mean, I'll send out a note, but it might be early spring and it'll be ready. And by all means, folks, use bookshop.org, please.
Yes. Yeah. And people can connect with your work at your website.
Right. And that is The Wisdom Teachings, all one word, .org, O-R-G.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Penny. And it's really been a treat, as always, to speak with you.
Love talking with you, Patricia. It's such a gift.
So at this point, we will move into our Q&A. And if people have a question, they can either ask it in the Q&A box or raise their hand. And then Joe will bring them on as a panelist, and they can ask their question face to face with you. So Joe, if you would come back on, I'm going to turn off my video, but I will be in the wings.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia and Penny, for that insightful and hopeful conversation. Now we do, as she said, want to open up for some opportunities for questions. And as we mentioned, to do that, you need to raise your hand, and we'll begin to call on some folks. And when you see, we have a question here from Gary, I think we would call on. And Gary, when you see pop up to say join as a panelist, then you need to click on that. And let me see if we can get you over here. There you go. And where did you go? Okay. There you are. And so you need to click on start your video and unmute. And we will let you ask your question of Penny.
Hello, Penny.
Hi, there you are. Hello, Gary. Nice to meet you.
Thank you very much, Penny, for what you've given us today. So, and hello, Patricia. Nice to see you again. Let me just quickly ask you, if I may. It seems to me that what would be most beneficial was for the whole world to have an NDE. And if we could experience death now while we're still living, it would remove so much of that fear, and it would provide us a different understanding of the everlasting. So in my head, what we really need, Penny, and you've addressed this beautifully, is a better model of the everlasting after we disincarnate.
Okay, I will turn it over.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That is just a wonderful suggestion. I love that idea, Gary. And I think I'd make it a little bigger and say we need, I don't know, it would really help if people weren't so spooked by thinking that there could be another realm than the one we inhabit every day. And, every culture thought that was true until about the 18th century. Most of human history has always recognized there's another realm where things happen and experiences happen, and there are beings that are not in visible body and blah, blah, blah. Because that's what the NDE experience, that's one of the NDE experiences is, yeah, that has reality for us. And I think it's a wide open question right now, at least in this country, is the churches, sorry, Joe, but the churches have a smaller and smaller, corner of the public conversation.
Right.
But there's also this desire for understanding what the rest is about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And a near-death experience is a great way to get a little hands-on information.
Well, that's so true. And to be a bit positive, there are churches that are beginning to open to the fact that there is more to spirituality and our spiritual nature than just can be found in doctrines and prayer books and so forth. In fact, remember, the Center for Contemporary Mysticism grew out of a men's group of people drinking coffee in the basement of a church. And it's not just that, but over our 10 years, we have really done a lot together and partnered. And it was, we're here almost because of the openness and open-mindedness of a particular church and a couple of particular rectors and so forth. So that is beginning to happen, I think. To move along, I see that Christine has a question. We'd like to invite Christine, if she would, to come on. Christine, you need to click the button that says join as a panelist, and then you'll turn on your video and unmute. There you are.
Hi there. I can see you.
I
can't
see
see
you.
Penny. There's Penny.
Hello.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
And thank you so much for this incredible talk today. I am getting both of your books. This is touching me very personally because I've been on the journey since a very, very long time. And back in 1979, I went to a personal growth training with an affirmation developed that was, let's just say the words radiant love is what my affirmation was all about. And it's been a mystery that's been unfolding all these years.
Yeah.
So the title radiant, my little eyeballs go, ooh, radiant, radiant. And what you talked about today is just so personal to me because I've been really dealing with early childhood trauma, but much more physically experienced. So I think I'm on course with what you're talking about. Like I'm physically experiencing it and not blocking it like I used to. I guess my question comes back to, and maybe I wasn't listening, but maybe you can just repeat something that you might have already discussed, but I didn't hear, which has to do with the fear. The fear of us dying is at the core, you said. And I guess my question has to do with without having, low power mode, without having, can you hear me still good? Without having a God or a heaven or a structure, which has been my challenge. I've kind of lost all those structures.
Mm-hmm.
Like right now you have, I don't even know how to say the name, Marush, whatever. I don't know what that name is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Madrushki. But have you put in a structure that's taken that place, or how do you get that? How do you, I don't know. I'm kind of lost, except for of course, the concept of love or the beloved. I'm kind of lost for what trumps fear.
Yeah. Thank you, Christine.
Woo. Well, I think I don't have a deity. And as I said, I'm not comfortable with the people of the book's understanding of that singular monotheistic God in charge of things, who pays attention to who wins high school football games. I mean, that's just not my path. But I think understanding it maybe as some version of mind that my little tiny brain can't even begin to grasp is one way to go, but it could also be a heart. It could be the radiant heart of the cosmos. You could, let me not challenge you, but suggest you start playing with different names. For a long time, I called it source because I thought, well, we all come out of that great unnameable womb. That source works. Spirit works for me because no one knows what that word means. And I think the important thing is it's the unnameable and the unconceptual, that you can't conceptualize it. If I can conceptualize it, it's not big enough.
Right. Yeah, I've felt that. I went through a period, I think, to where I'd begin to pray, and I'd pray, okay, Holy Spirit or Jesus or Mother Mary or whoever's on duty today.
Oh, that's great, Joe.
We had an interesting question from our Q&A box from Regina, who said, I feel as though those facing extreme poverty, incredible family demands, or high levels of discrimination and such have many fewer resources to move further into their suffering. If one is trying to survive, moving into extraordinary pain might undermine this survival for themselves and their children. So, maybe respond to that, because I know that question does come up. I've seen it, I've thought about it. In a way, those of us talking about this are those who don't have to work a second or third job on Sunday, to feed their family. Yeah. And how do you think of that?
Well, I don't think it's such a huge commitment. I mean, I love that you care about that. That's absolutely beautiful. And, more people who cared about it would give permission to people to just in the moment. I mean, 5 minutes of turning from feeling really attacked by some horrible boss or something, and being able to turn it around and comfort yourself instead of buying into that structure's definition of who you are, but just being able to hold your own heart and say, this is so painful and it is so not okay, and I can hold this bruised part of myself, is a way to start to shift the energy a little bit. And I've never had a spiritual director. I've never had a therapist, really. And this has been me muddling through. As I say, I lurched through my life, and I've had endless privilege. I'm an outrageously privileged human being. But healing doesn't require money. It requires kindness.
Well, and you even talked about we can't be compassionate to others until we're compassionate ourselves. Right. And one of the questions that came in through Q&A says this person related it to love. It's almost, you can't be compassionate until you have love, and so you can't love others or be compassionate until you really love yourself. So it's almost, it seems like to me that's what you were getting at all along.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we have a question from Sophia. Sophia, I'll ask you to come on and ask your question. If you would click the button that says join as a panelist, and then turn on your video and unmute, we will let you to ask a question to Penny. There you are.
Hi, Penny, and hi, Patricia. And
lovely to meet you.
So nice to meet you. And it was really nice because before this came on, I was listening to Fareed Zakaria. So I've had 2 hours of intelligent talk, and it's so nice. So
he's another old political scientist, by the way.
Oh, love him. So okay, my favorite thing that you said was, because I say this all the time, that the universe wants us to flourish. Okay. I feel my word is divine intelligence. I use that a lot, but I use God a lot too. But I've been struggling here. I've been struggling with this, and I'm going to admit it. I'm just not into suffering, and when I see people suffer, that's when I suffer.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I suffer, is when to see what's going on. I mean, I could just, it grabs me, but I'm not into suffering. And like you, I feel I've been extremely privileged on this earth. I mean, extremely, which drives me to help other people that, don't have that lovely childhood and all that. But, and so I'm struggling with this thing of not being into suffering. Like,
I think your suffering is about your suffering and a sense of powerlessness. And there's a little story about you undoubtedly know this, about a little girl walking along a beach, and a whole bunch of starfish have been washed up on the beach, and of course they're going to die in the sun. And she picks one up and tosses it back into the ocean, and she walks a little further and she picks one up and tosses it back into the ocean. And some big old man is watching her do this and saying, little girl, that's just stupid. There's no meaning in doing that. That it doesn't mean anything. And she looks up at him and she says, it does to those starfish.
That's a great question, Sophia. And I'm thinking sometimes it can come across like in the teachings that you have, Penny, you're not necessarily selling suffering. Go out and more. But your teachings are saying through suffering, we get compassion. And the point is, even if you're not big on suffering, through the suffering in your life, and Sophia, as I've gotten to know you, I take you as a very compassionate person. So then out of that comes the compassion. And, I think we can see it in little ways. For example, why is it that we always have a change of mood and a change of heart when we're around or interacting with young children? See, and that to me is interesting, because in our heart and our memory, even our DNA, we remember what it was like to be a young child, how you are tiny and the world is large. And, you have questions about, is everything going to work out? How am I going to manage in this great big world when I'm such a little person? So you see, there's almost a suffering that begins there, and you're struggling with those questions. And when we're around a young child, that all comes back to us, I think, and it's why we immediately almost move into a more compassionate mode just by being in the presence of a young child. I like the saying that no matter how big or bad you get, if a 3-year-old hands you their telephone, you're going to answer. And what does it do? It brings us back to that memory that we were all small. We all suffered in that sense of not being sure about how we encounter this great big world. And through that compassion, then, I think brings the change, that you're talking about. We had a good question that comes in from Sherry in our Q&A, and I like this. She said, Penny, if you could go back, what would you say to yourself when you were 30 years old?
Oh, man. Sherry, that's how I agreed to write the first book. I didn't want to write it. And Manjushri said, so when you were 30, if somebody had handed you a book like this, would you have been glad? I said, oh shit, okay, I'll do it. Now, I would have begged myself to take seriously how lonely I felt, and to use that as an entrance to what I was completely repressing. It would have made a huge difference in my life.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. And we had one more I'll throw in from Dale on Vashon Island. I get a feeling maybe that's a neighbor of yours, who said, how can we enlist the support and wisdom of animals and our pets in our healing journeys?
Well, let me introduce you to my familiar. There, can you see her?
Yes.
I don't, I live alone. I live quite a solitary life in some ways, but the the dog is more than just a distraction and company. I'm watching her able to express what she needs in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Has been a gigantic 24/7 teacher to me. Absolutely wonderful. And their response to kindness is awesome. She also knows when I'm upset and I'm trying to ignore it.
Wow. Well, that's wonderful. Listen, I want to say thanks again to Penny and Patricia for your engaging dialogue, and to all of you who have asked questions or sent things in through Q&A and participated in today's program. So, Penny, I'll ask, we got a little hint maybe about the next book, but I always like to ask our speaker, what's next for you in the way of books, travels, projects?
Well, winter on an island surrounded by Lake Superior that leaves not too many possibilities of travel. I don't travel much anymore. That's okay. I did tons when I was younger. So there will be, kind of low-level retreat time, plenty of time to sit, write in my journal, read a little bit, enjoy the lake and the snow and the ice. And then I'm really just beginning to be underway, I hope, with this new book. And I think it's going to be a collection of little vignettes, little stories about the process of healing. And the point I want to make visible, I want to show it more than tell it, is that healing is possible. Healing is within the grasp of all of us. And we need to believe that. And so people who are on healing journeys must tell the stories so that the rest of us can see that. So.
Well, that's wonderful, and you can learn more about Penny's teachings, also those of Manjushri and Kuan Yin, and her books and talks and essays on her website, which is thewisdomteachings.org. Patricia, we wanted you to come back on before we take off. There you are. We're so grateful for you and your insightful and wonderful questions. It's just always a joy. I kind of feel honored. I kind of set everything up, get the car ready, and crank the engine. Then I turn it over to Patricia and our guest, and we have a wonderful ride. So she does such a great job, and we're always grateful. And you can learn more about Patricia's We Awakening podcast. If you haven't learned about that, you should really do it. It's phenomenal. And also her books and companion groups that she leads at her website, which is Patricia Pierce, spelled PEARCE.com. So we can also learn, we encourage you, if you haven't visited the center's website, to go there to contemporarymysticism.org and learn about our programs. And I still have a bunch of great programs and speakers coming up in the new year. Our next one is the internationally acclaimed spiritual teacher Matthew Fox. We also have joining us is Jeffrey Olson, Evan Alexander, and more. So you can find out about those at contemporarymysticism.org. So I want to thank each one of you for being here. You're a light in our life, and we love to gather around with you. So thanks again for being with us. And until we meet again, I'll say stay safe, be well, and remember, you are perfect just exactly as you are. Namaste.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Patricia.
Love to all.